Hi, I'm Emily here from the Whale Interpretive Centre in Telegraph Cove, and today we're going to be discussing about why it's so complicated to release captive killer whales back to the wild. If you'd like to hear this video en français, check out my coworker Audrey's video. She'll be doing the same video for us in French. So before we talk about any of this, the topic of killer whales being in captivity has been one of great publicity the last couple years since the release of the documentary Blackfish. You may have seen this video, definitely check it out, it's on Netflix. Or if you've seen campaigns on Facebook or any kind of research about that, and you may have an opinion on whether killer whales should be kept in captivity or not. And this video is not meant to change that opinion. It's not meant to even have an opinion. We're just discussing why it's so complicated to take killer whales and put them back in the ocean, because so many people come in and they've either seen Blackfish or they don't like the thought of killer whales being in captivity and they think we should just release them. And this video is meant to discuss why that isn't really as simple as it sounds, and it's not as feasible as you might think. And so that's all this video is trying to do, not have an opinion either way on whether we should be keeping killer whales in captivity. So again, lots of people come in and they think, well, let's just release them. Let's put them on a truck and throw them back in the ocean. And this is actually quite complicated. And so there's a number of factors that make this difficult. So we can look at the example of Keiko. Keiko was the whale who played Willie in Free Willy, which I'm sure lots of you have probably seen. And this was a really big changing point because suddenly people realized that Willie was not actually free. He was still in a tank somewhere. And so this huge public outcry came and all these people wanted to see Free Willy or Keiko released back to his native waters of Iceland. And so a whole bunch of money was raised and a lot of public support was garnered, and he was moved back to Iceland to a sea pen, where he was, they went about the task of trying to untrain a killer whale that they had spent years training to be, people, had been, molding him to what they wanted him to be. So suddenly we had an animal that, probably couldn't feed himself in the wild because we've been hand feeding him most of his life, who really couldn't hold his breath very long because he was never spending much time underwater. He was at the surface interacting with his trainers and getting fed at the surface, so why would he have to hold his breath? He couldn't really echolocate, or at least he didn't, and we didn't know whether or not he couldn't or just didn't need to. Imagine you're in a small pen the whole time. You don't need to be navigating the small pen because after a while you just know it. And so we didn't see much echolocation, and he wasn't really interested in doing things that wild killer whales needed to do. And so we went about the exercise of trying to train him to be wild, which is kind of a funny concept. And so with that, we did have some success. Slowly over time, we tried to reintegrate him back with wild killer whales. Of course, at this time, if you've been to the Whale Interpretive Centre or done kind of any whale watching tours, probably you've learned that we photo ID killer whales. At this time, the Icelandic population had not been any photo ID work done, so we didn't know where he came from. And so we were doing our best. We had him in the right ocean. Hopefully, maybe we'd stumble upon the right family, but we really had no idea. And so we, took him out and kind of walked him. He'd follow the boat and, try and reintegrate him. Eventually, he did go with some wild killer whales, which everyone was very excited about. And he was actually quite independent for close to a year. Which was a roaring success. Everyone was really excited, but unfortunately he did regress in Norway. He seemed to crave the company of people again, and he came in and was interacting with people who were on the docks and that kind of thing, and he died shortly thereafter of pneumonia. And so this was kind of a success and kind of not. Of course, he did pass away at a younger age than what we'd commonly see in wild killer whales, but he seemed to, live independently for some time and was feeding himself, so that was really, really promising. And so, as I mentioned, there's some things that are complicated. Now, Keiko was a wild killer whale, so we could take him back, but if you've been to the Whale Interpretive Centre, or again, if you've gone whale watching, you might know that there's distinct populations of killer whales that are from all the world's oceans around the world. We have 3 in British Columbia. You can check out our 3 ecotypes of killer whales video. Here we talk about the ones in BC. And these types of killer whales, these ecotypes, they don't actually breed together. And so when we breed killer whales in captivity, let's say the mom is from the Pacific Northwest and maybe the father is from Iceland like Keiko and Tilikum was, perhaps we've created an animal that really shouldn't exist in nature. These animals, the parents are from different oceans, and even if they're from the same ocean, they don't breed together because they're different ecotypes. And so this means that the animals that we've created, where would we release them to? These animals don't actually have a lineage that we can track in nature, so it's really hard to tell what we should do with them. This also means too that they haven't actually learned a language. They don't speak a dialect that we commonly see in nature. You know, again, we talk about each different ecotype of killer whale has a different dialect. In fact, the northern residents who are around Telegraph Cove, there's 3 different dialects. But, and this is really important to killer whale functioning in kind of society and culture, but these animals that are born in captivity, who are, you know, in a pen that's with some captive bred and some wild caught from all over the world, they don't speak a set dialect that we can return them to. So you could say, okay, well, if we've got a group that's in captivity that is, you know, a pod or a matriline, if you will, you know, a group that could be a social group together, why don't you just release them all together? Well, then we get back to, can they feed themselves? Can they navigate the waters? Are they just going to follow boats and people around, which is dangerous for them and people? You know, if someone hits a killer whale, that could be damaging to them or their boat, and not to mention the damage it would do to the killer whale. And so this makes it really complex. Now, a recent kind of trend that's been brought up is releasing these killer whales into retirement homes or sea pens where they're going to live out the rest of their life in a more natural habitat. There is some mixed reviews on the safety of sea pens. Some people said that, you know, some people thought maybe that the sea pens had a negative impact on Keiko's health. And you know, there's in live captures of whales, when we put them in pens, sometimes they get tangled in the pens and can drown. And so that's been wagered. It's also a really expensive venture, and who would pay for that? You know, would the aquarium that originally had the killer whale, do they have to pay for it? Is it the government of the place that the whale now resides? For example, if we brought killer whales from aquariums in the United States up to Canada, does Canada have to pay for it? Does a not-for-profit pay for it? Is it by donation? How do we do this? Who is staffing these? Because, you know, these animals would need to continue to be fed. And so there's a lot of questions about that. So it could be a solution, but it's not a simple one either. And so what really we're hoping that you'll take away from this whole video is that there is some options. Whether you believe they should be kept in captivity, or if they're unreleasable, if they should be euthanized or live out their days, or what we should do with them, that's absolutely your opinion to have. But it's not just as simple as just dumping them in the ocean, unfortunately. This makes it for a really interesting kind of discussion on what we should do with the remainder of the killer whales that are in captivity around the world. If you have any questions about this video or any questions about killer whales, don't hesitate to drop by the Whale Interpretive Centre. We're going to be open towards the end of September. This is actually our last WIC Clip. And so we want to thank you so much for being so excited and all your great comments and watching them and sharing them. And we look forward to seeing, hopefully, most of you in the Whale Interpretive Centre again next year. Have a great fall and winter, everybody.